Thank you so much for joining our session, y'all. This is my first time in Mobile, Alabama. So I'm really grateful to be here with Miss Gwen, Sarita, and Ryan. Just before coming here, we went to Africa Town's Heritage House, which I think was super grounding for us when us talking about storytelling and lived experience. So if you're new to Mobile like I am, definitely recommend to check that out if you have a few hours of time to go up to Africa Town. And there's also a documentary called The Descendants that just came out on Netflix about it, which I was telling them TikTok heard me talking about it because I started getting all the videos before I came. So I'm Celine Rendon. I'm with Land Justice Community School. My presentation is going to be a bit rough around the edges. As a community organizer and climate resilience planner, I'm kind of start primarily with my journey in the environmental field and kind of how that's led to my current work with Land Justice Community School. I've been in the environmental field for the past 10 years now. And in my time, talking about environmental science at UT Austin, there was no mention around environmental justice. There was no mention about race and class. And it was a really interesting time where I wasn't getting that in my formal education, but I got involved as a community organizer on Austin's East Side with people organized in defense of earth and our resources, BOLED. They're an environmental justice group that focuses primarily in the East Side around historically, like in the 90s when there was extractive industries in people's backyards of Black and Brown communities, low-income communities. But the present day issues that we were up against in the current day on affordable housing and gentrification and displacement. I've been a part of a lot of DEI efforts, which I know many folks here could probably resonate with. I often say I was a victim of DEI efforts because I was often thrown in community engagement positions, trying to take the load of getting city staff on board that we were doing a climate equity plan. So helping facilitate workshops, bring in community lived experience as in our advisory boards, and then also making sure that we had a shared definition around climate equity, environmental justice, and so on. Aside from like climate planning and resilience efforts, I've worked a lot with K through 12 environmental education efforts, focusing a lot on youth leadership development, also, storytelling and like healing opportunities centered around popular education models. So it's been a really good mix, I think, early on in my career for environmentalism work, and to kind of like being in the classroom or teaching students. I was just constantly reminded of like, it's great for me to be teaching this, but like, I'm really smart. And like, I'm not just meant to be a community engagement person. Like, I'm a researcher. I know about data and science and research. Like, I want to be back in the field. So I got into the adaptation field and did a lot of climate planning efforts focused primarily on frontline environmental justice communities. And this was before the admin change where now they censor everything and took that all out. But I was working among like the Justice 40 initiative with the community change grant. And so there was a lot of opportunities and funding available when I was working with like frontline community groups, whether in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, with Rastafarian farmers that were on the front lines of, major drought, water shortages and hurricanes, and working with them to create a competitive grant that would upgrade their infrastructure of their market hall on their isolated side of the island into a resilience hub. And it was already, before we even got there, they already had raised money and got that market hall up running solely on solar power energy and other renewable energy sources. I've done a lot of work as well in northern Louisiana and Shreveport, and also South Texas, and a lot of parallels on just the current environmental justice issues, whether it's SpaceX and LNG, which is huge in the Rio Grande Valley. If y'all know about South Texas EJ Network, they've been working against those extractive industries for the past few decades. And some of the most like biodiverse areas in all of Texas that are now being threatened by SpaceX and LNG expansion. But again, as a community organizer, like working with frontline communities is understanding that these systems are working just as they are planned. They are facilitated by the city, by the county, by researchers in the field, and so on. That kind of took up most of our conversations, but how are we actively addressing issues around health, air quality, flooding issues, and extreme heat? And I've done some work in Roanoke, Virginia as well, but just to say, across all of the communities I worked with as a resilience planner, a lot of the root cause issues are based on like land use and land development. I do a lot of housing organizing work in Austin against gentrification displacement, which is like the legacy from the environmental justice movement. I'm one of the core organizers of community powered ATX. And so it's been a nonstop, like 24/7 nonstop work. I feel like being in my environmental field and then as an organizer, volunteer. But yeah, the root cause, looking at land use and how, the master's tools are used to legitimize a lot of the development of extractive industries, how the city facilitates those partnerships, gives tax breaks or incentives for those extractive industries, and the narrative that, oh, it's going to bring us jobs. It's good for the environment. We love EVs. Meanwhile, I remember being a student and be like, why did anyone like Elon Musk? It doesn't make sense to me. Only then to be like, oh, I told you all that like 8 years ago, along with all the other community groups, Black and brown folks that told y'all what was going to happen. So the bottom left, when I talk about community organizing, that kind of just shows up in all of my professional experiences, but also my experiences like in the community and with relationships with people I've met the past decade. And that, I've been seeing a lot of presentations since this is my first time at GulfCon, and like I know a lot of people like to tell about what they did right, but I think as a Virgo, I love to talk about what didn't work right and actually what went wrong, because I feel like those are the best moments of like growth and learning, because you need to be uncomfortable in order to like grow and develop yourself as an individual or in your community. And that's kind of what it's been like nonstop this past decade. Just highlighting, if we're trying to do climate equity, if we're trying to advance, research efforts and trying to address, issues around air quality, extreme heat, and so on, we have to understand the existing power dynamics that are at play that have put us in this position. So that's been my framework nonstop. I'm grateful that I've had a lot of mentors that have supported me in this field, that have given me the actual job opportunities, because being a part of DEI efforts does not guarantee a lot of Black and brown students future job opportunities. They often get pushed into community engagement roles, temporary roles, or not paid what they're worth. So I'm just super appreciative of my mentors that I've always said, like, you're a researcher, like, you're a great speaker, you're a storyteller, you're many of these things. So just very grateful for that. And across my journey, just always being super passionate around storytelling, because you meet a lot of folks, whether elders or youth, and I'm just like, we need to write this down. Like, we need to put that out there. Like, we need to share whenever you're ready. And that's really what a lot of my work has been brought to at this moment with Land Justice Community School. Land Justice Community School was formerly called Start Empowerment, which was started in 2019. We had a team based in New York City and then a team based in Texas, and it kind of just made sense with the heavy work we were doing to kind of split off into two different orgs. So for Texas base, we became Land Justice Community School. We build frontline youth leadership development, community-rooted education, and community-owned systems for Black, brown, Indigenous, immigrant, and working class communities, advancing self-determination, land sovereignty, and climate justice in the face of displacement and environmental crisis. We're talking about community-rooted education. It's kind of like going back to our roots of cultural knowledge, cultural memory, and intergenerational elder and youth exchange. which could look like a lot of different types of applied practices. And then when I'm saying community-owned systems, that looks like food cooperatives, housing cooperatives. A lot of the organizers, part of our org, are rooted in housing justice. So again, what I was mentioning about land use, we're kind of trying to look at alternative housing models that do not rely on the market, because we know the market does not serve us, especially with the for low-income working class communities. So how can we envision and teach youth through political education about alternative models that do not rely on that system? Like community land trusts, or, food co-ops and all of that great stuff. For our vision, we really just envision a future where youth and communities lead through storytelling, cultural knowledge, and community-based learning, remaining deeply connected to their land, histories, and each other. We're headquartered in Austin, but I would say our work expands Central and South Texas along the Gulf Coast, and then now expanding in Louisiana. So we have a number of different programs. Don't want to focus too much on that. But just as we started with Soraya about storytelling, understanding from my perspective and lens is that communication is not neutral. It really does shape who gets heard, funded, and protected. Data alone doesn't move people, stories and people do. And as scientists and educators, it really is our responsibility to not just share what we know, but also considering like how we're actually sharing that. And so my perspective and knowledge is a bit more radical, going into like some of the examples I have, but it's community-based. Some of the general guidelines I have in storytelling efforts is centering people, not just problems. I think a lot of the time when we work with Black and Indigenous communities, we often kind of center a lot on trauma and, if youth are so used to seeing ourselves in a trauma, in a traumatic exposure, whether it's on the news and what you see happening in your community, to stories of trauma and such, you're kind of normalizing that this is nonstop experience of your people, and you're not centering the resistance or the healing that is going on as well. The second is just co-producing, not extracting. And then third, matching format to purpose, which I'll give a deep run through on because we have a number of different formats to use. And then finally, always including a pathway to act. So I have examples for all of these four. And of course, on your worksheet, a lot of the questions we have on there reflect some of the presentations that we'll have here. So first, we're centering people, not problems. Let's start here. So I didn't want to go into all of our programs because I think some of the examples I have will kind of give a breakdown better than me just reading it to y'all. But that was one of our food gardens with the Allison Elementary School. We have an Indigenous curriculum led by Red Hawk Gutierrez, who works with the Allison PTA parents, as well as the school and the principal and the surrounding neighborhood in Antopolis, which is primarily low-income, heavily immigrant-based community, but historically it was a freedmen community of formerly enslaved folks in the Austin area. And then during the 2000s, there was an influx of immigrant communities from Mexico. So centering people, not just problems. Like I said, it's really important to consider the type of narratives that we put out about our communities, that we're not always just on the front lines and fighting against something, but we're actually building towards something and healing and bringing back cultural practices that our parents have talked about or our grandparents have talked about. And we also need to be very specific when we talk about communities, because I think sometimes we could be quick to be like, oh, people of color, but it's like, well, it's not a monolith. Just like Mexican communities are not a monolith. Whether you're first generation immigrant, second generation, it's not a monolith. There's a lot of different cultural aspects that I think get lost. And I feel like when you're watching these new age Netflix movies, you're just like, oh my God, this is lame. Because it just seems like such a superficial monolith idea of certain community groups. So yeah, just moving away from subjects and how are we involving the folks that we're working with as storytellers and leaders. There really are producers of content and such. One tip I do have is like this looked really pretty, and I'm trying to like for us at least, making sure that we're elevating a lot of our work because I think a lot of us probably in this room are artists or like to think of ourselves as creative. One of my good friends who's actually from Alabama and is now in Austin, he's been helping us. He's a videographer and he's been wanting to get involved in community work and such. So he helped put this together. The people you saw interviewed are all people that are part of the program development. They're also from the neighborhood. They're involved as community leaders and organizers. So we're not bringing in outside folks to do this for us. It's all homegrown. And then lastly, I think was that is that we try to highlight everyone that's part of our team. We try to highlight like the videographer. We try to highlight like the people that contributed to it, which I'm excited. I'll show on some projects from now where that will be. Okay, it's gonna start really immediate, so I just want to wait. This next video is kind of an organizing video. I don't know if y'all know about Perfect Union on social media. They do media about working class people and some of the systemic issues in the US, like workers' rights, tenants' rights, and such. So the next example I'm going to show, our founder of Lancaster Community School, Alexia Litver, she had a connection with Perfect Union. And one of the biggest issues in Austin right now is narrative. Austin is known as like a green, liberal city, progressive, environmentally friendly. But if you talk to like low-income people there, it's like we're barely making it to survive. Everyone's one paycheck away from being displaced or unhoused. So I think some of the biggest housing justice issues is narrative because we have quote unquote progressive leaders. But it's not very much out there about the harmful policies that they're pushing around of zoning and deregulation of our housing market. So the next video I have is an example of our collaboration with Perfect Union. We just pitched our story. We had a narrative, we had an outline of what we wanted to show to them. They read it, they asked questions. We even gave them like a research packet of points of like fact research of like our narrative and what we were trying to get across. And luckily we were able to like have them come down and film one of our people versus tech billionaire rally. So that's what this next video is gonna be. Okay, pretty spicy. But as you saw with that, the people we interviewed, like those were the tenants that we were working alongside from the tenant association. We had Carmen Yanes Pulido, she's like an environmental activist in Austin. We had our organizers, people from the east side that made parallel connections to what was happening at this affordable housing complex. So, how are we building this with people and not just extracting their stories, but putting them on the front and center to get their story out and their narrative? And that also leads to like long-term trust, relationship building, making sure you're telling accuracy and sustaining engagement. And this was really exciting for us because this brought our narrative from a local level to a national level. So collaborating with Perfect Union, which has a national media audience, but making those intersectional connections to environmentalism, to corporate greed, to housing, to, how people are going from homeowner rented to a housed, and just getting those talking points over and over again. And we prepped people before this. We never just throw community members into the fire, not prepared. It really is about like leadership development, making sure they feel confident in telling your story. Okay. This next one is just a fun example of like a community event we had. We try to center a lot of healing and community building into our events and getting the community out, know what's going on. And with all of our events, the youth fellows that we work with year round co-host with us and help plan the events. So it's like, you got to find the DJ with us. You're going to find who's going to come in, who's going to make the tamales, who's going to make the hot dogs, who's going to invite their friends from school, all those things. Because it's really about like getting back to our roots, building community efforts. Because I'm not going to lie to y'all, a lot of community members do not want to go into a fluorescent room for a presentation on boring things that don't really connect with them. Like you really do have to meet people when they're at. You have to build a relationship. It's not a one and done deal. Cool. So that was like a 90s. I know a lot of people are like, social media, y'all, you have to use social media. I'm sorry. The social media has to be a requirement. If you're saying that you do community engagement, you have to have social media. At this point in time, people's attention spans are so low. You really have like 5 seconds of a start time to get them engaged. That is if you're doing like public media stuff. So yeah, that's like a reel that you would see on something like TikTok or Instagram, which a lot of students have. Whether or not you think that's a good thing, it just is what it is. We also have a long form podcast. This was started by Land Justice Community School in partnership with Community Powered ATX through our fellowship program. So this is an example of like one of our, I'll just play the first. So that was just an intro to one of our podcasts. That was Nika Arnold. She's the community organizer and head of the Healing Project. They're like a food distribution organization. They also focus on like cultural healing in the community. But this podcast was what our 2 Eastside Fellows wanted to pursue as their summer project. We said, what did y'all want to do? They're like, let's start a podcast. So we made it happen. And that was in partnership with DAWA, which is an Eastside organization that has like free podcast studio equipment for us to have used. And it was a great partnership because it's something they wanted to support. But the focus was like on land use, environmental justice, and community organizing. And so a lot of the 2 fellows, well, you didn't see them, but you'll see them in future photos. They really enjoyed this podcast because it let them meet other people in their community that are also from East Austin, and kind of that sharing of cultural memory and storytelling. And I talked to Genesis, who's going to be a senior, or she just finished her junior year this year. But she said that this has been her favorite project she's done with us, and she actually wants to go into environmental science. I don't know if that's good with me, probably. But she really enjoyed working with us because she said, like, I see that my community is special. I see that my community is made up of like really amazing leaders that are confident, that are funny, that are smart. And I see like where I come from now is like a special place in Austin that I didn't see before. So I really love that. Again, just with storytelling and like it has to be place-based, I think, to be authentic, and it has to have the people as collaborators. So that's like an example of a long form media piece, like a podcast, where we'll usually take screenshots, or we'll even take, clips and post it like short stuff on social media. And then I'm not going to go into these, but these are story maps. I'm sure this crowd is very familiar. I have a story map on the Rio Grande Valley that we co-created with a lot of the frontline EJ organizing orgs in the Gulf Coast. And that was really great just because it's like a hub of information. If you're learning about who are the community orgs doing work on environmentalism or even conservation work, like it's a one-stop shop. And then there's another story map of land use in Austin, Texas, that goes all the way from colonialism to modern day gentrification displacement. And then lastly, I think it's always important to include a pathway to act. We always usually put call to actions, because that's if you're trying to have people go a certain way, you have to have a call to action. So if people actually care from your video, what can they do next? And this has been super effective in getting like civic engagement, but also getting people aware of your organization and supporting efforts that supports youth leadership development, community development. And then I just wrote, it's on your worksheet, I just created a strategy of like how you actually create short form media. And then these are just the tools that are free. You have Canva, or not free, but low cost to free. I use Canva, CapCut, ArcGIS Story Maps, and TikTok. And yeah, this is my last slide, but we're actually launching a community media justice lab this summer. We're bringing in journalism and training for youth in East Austin to develop their media production skills and interviewing, writing, and ethical storytelling. It's going to have a lot of partnerships. We're working with Eastside Memorial and their AV department. And it's going to be we want to do skits, we want to do a short film, and we want to do a podcast. So it's going to be a mix of like different fun stuff to be able to do. But yeah, thank you.